Hi, Daniel. Thanks for
Hi.
joining me today.
Thank you for the
Um,
opportunity.
yeah, no, this will be great.
hmm
One of the things I know that you're working on with
Yep.
organizations right now are how they are building and scaling AI into their business. And what we're seeing on our side is there's a lot of adoption that's happening faster than the security and risk conversations can keep up. So I'd like to spend some time today learning from you and unpacking where that starts to break down, especially as AI is moving from experimentation into, real operational use. So let's get started. First question. Working with organizations across the US, Europe, and the Middle East, what's the level of excitement that you're seeing right now and how they're adopting and approaching AI? And are you seeing any surprising geographical or industry differences or outliers?
No, it's a great question, and the excitement is out there. I mean, we are seeing excitement everywhere across industries, across geographies. I mean, you can imagine a not-for-profit organization that's writing a number of grants, being able to way to draft them faster and actually increase their return of those that are accepted. You can imagine a software company leveraging AI as a way to accelerate the development of code and modernize technology systems. At the same time, there's also an increasing recognition of the need to do so in a responsible fashion with the right guardrails, controls, requirements, approval, and visibility in place, not as a way to slow down, but as a way to actually accelerate. You could think the brake in the car allows you to go faster because now you're more comfortable driving down the highway.
Is there any, whether it's geographical or industry based, is there any area you're seeing that is the most either resistant or feels the most trapped by regulations or other types of concerns? They just kind of feel like they can't move as fast as their peers and other companies?
Yeah, so from an industry standpoint, there's nuances and there's differences when you look across industries. Financial services, for example, very focused on explainability and model risk. How do we you leverage AI in a way that it, say, for example, accelerates decisions around lending, but also provides transparency to make sure that the proper controls are put in place. When you get into more industrial companies, whether that's utilities, whether that's oil and gas, whether that's aviation, there's also recognition of the safety factor in this. And how do we ensure that we've got the proper guardrails in, and where are we comfortable using AI and not using AI?
So I think some organizations would say that, they're doing AI responsibly or as responsibly
Mhm.
as they can. I also see some organizations admitting that they're all still trying to figure it out, that they are putting things in place, but that
Yep.
we're all as an industry trying to figure it out. So I'm really interested in, because nothing is really mature yet, everything is still nascent or, everyone's trying it out. What should companies expect from each other at a practical level as far as responsible AI usage and implementation?
No, it's both. At the end of the day, when we think about responsible AI, organizations are still figuring it out, are still trying to understand what it means, but also recognizing the need for effective controls and governance. We like to think that when we talk about AI and agents, they're not all created equal. There's a difference between, say, more traditional machine learning, deterministic AI, non-deterministic or generative AI, and agentic AI. And then within agentic AI, you can imagine a knowledge research agent that goes out and produces some research reports for you versus one that acts as an autonomous employee. And it's making sure that you're differentiating between the different types of agents, that you understand the risk profiles of each, the corresponding controls and guardrails that need to be put in place, because not all agents are equal, nor do they need to be treated in the same way as a result, and ensuring that those have sufficient controls relative to the level of risk. It also means being open and transparent with how we're actually using AI, where are we using it, where are we not using it, and ensure that's clear with internally in the organization employees and externally to other constituents.
Yeah, it's funny when I asked you that question, I didn't even think to stop and talk about the different types of AI. I feel like 6 months ago, 9 months ago, we all assumed it was
Yep.
LM, chat GPT type of
Mm.
concerns. And now, I mean, my just working assumptions, we're talking about agentic AI is the biggest concern, although there's still concerns with
Yeah.
other types of AI. What
Mm.
about what about like in building AI programs for the companies you're working with? What parts of those designs are you seeing as the most critical success factors for how they're, in real operational environments?
No, 100%. As much as we're here talking about technology and as much as here we're talking about the development of AI, I'd really focus on the governance and ensuring that there's clear organization ownership, accountability, understanding who's got the decision to make as to what AI agents and AI capabilities are we going to actually stand up and approve. Very often, there's a need to make sure that there's a clear business case for those agents. Who is making that decision? Who's doing the actual reviews and checks and ensuring that, hey, the agent is meeting the guardrails? Is that the security organization? But not all the risks that are introduced are actually owned by security, nor are all the controls. Who's doing the final go no go decision as to whether or not this agent could be used in the organization or used externally? Is that clear? As much as we focus on the technology, if these components are not done right and not clarity, you end up slowing down the process.
Yeah, I definitely have been seeing that too. And for AI governance, security and risk organizations or security and risk teams and organizations,
Yep.
we're used to dealing with these types of frameworks, these types of controls. AI governance is a new type of governance, but has all the same types of look and feel and ingredients of other
Yeah.
frameworks. Do you see some of those, whether it's technology teams or business teams? Is it harder for them to understand their roles and responsibilities because they don't typically have them already in other types of frameworks?
No, it's we're introducing a number of terms around controls, risk management, guardrails, governance, and you're right. For many parts of the organization, thinking about this in the context of AI is new. That's why it's important to recognize that AI is a whole of organization responsibility and a shared responsibility in driving these conversations. As a business leader, what is my role? As a technology officer, what is my role? As security, where do I plug in and where am I not necessarily needed because somebody else is accountable for that risk? And driving and having these conversations, it's sure it's documented, well understood, and then actually taking a couple of use cases and testing it. Does this framework, does this governance structure work for the types of agents or types of AI capabilities a particular organization is developing and putting into practice?
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, even for AI frameworks or AI governance frameworks that organizations have, they feel good about. Like they're looking at the frameworks, they
Mhm.
think, yep, we have all the right roles, responsibilities, all the right checkpoints. We can do this. This
Yeah.
is great. Which controls in those frameworks are kind of at the most risk of failing when the business is really pushing for speed?
Yeah, no, the notion of speed is critical because what we're saying is AI is an accelerator when done right and when put in a responsible fashion. What I would say is once those controls are defined, once they're identified, whether it's identity and access management controls, whether it's data protection controls, whether it's visibility and monitoring, ensuring that they are built into a centralized platform and having an orchestration layer from which the agents are then spun up. You don't want a situation where everybody's excited, as we were talking about earlier, about leveraging and deploying AI, but then spinning up their own technology platforms, their own tools and capabilities. That's where the controls that you're referencing start breaking down because you can't track them, you can't manage them, you can't ensure that they're working as intended. But having a centralized platform with the controls built in then allows individuals in the organization and business functions to spin up agents within those platforms with the governance that's already built in. And as a result, can actually do so at speed without breaking down or adversely affecting the risk that's introduced.
Can you talk a bit more about what you've seen organizations do for that when it's experimental uses versus full on operational enterprise rollout, like with either those controls or those? I mean, enterprise rollout, yes, you would need all
Mhm.
of that. But for
Yeah.
experimental usage, what are they doing successfully to enable the speed, but also try to have some of those controls that they may not be able to normally
Mhm.
put into a sandbox environment or, what have you?
No, it's very, very similar to cybersecurity as a whole. And we think non AI focused systems where, hey, I need sandboxes stood up. I need development environments. I need test environments. I need to make sure that I've got realistic data sets that have been de identified and sanitized that I can run my and train my agents on. It is a challenge, though, sometimes because as I'm building agents, I actually need to have very often access to realistic production data. So making sure that the requisites are there, but still, as you're building these, the controls are put in place. You're still doing so in a test environment with representative data, ensuring that you're able to build these agents in a safe and responsible way.
Okay. So you drew that corollary to just, regular cybersecurity
Yeah.
types of controls and challenges. Do you see AI security as something that is fundamentally new, or is it really just an extension or relabeling of the problems we already should know how to solve?
The verdict is still out. The jury is still deliberating. This is an ongoing debate and discussion within the cybersecurity community of what is truly existing, what is truly net new, and what are risks that are exacerbated from already previously known risks. The notion of, say, every agent needs to have an identity and identity and access management, or I need to create an inventory of my agents so I can make sure that I'm tracking them across the life cycle. That's something that's not new, but rather it's being applied still to AI agents. When you talk about some of the risks, for example, that are introduced, you could think of, hey, multi-agent behavior. You could think of chain vulnerabilities. You could think of data flows between agents that are not always visible. It's those that are newly introduced and where you're seeing the corresponding controls, for example, kill switches that are required to be put in place, is where you're starting to see the introduction of new capabilities. I'd also go without service if we didn't talk about Mythos and AI as an attack vector. And that is what is essentially accelerating the speeds of vulnerability identification, and as a result, the need to patch and maintain and mitigate the risks in systems. That is truly new in terms of the speed, and is something that the world is working through and trying to figure out as we go.
Yep, absolutely. So, are there any other risks other than the ones you just mentioned as far as trying to figure out, what's kind of the same versus different? Are there any other risks around AI that you think leadership teams are not quite grasping or not quite understanding?
Yeah, I think one thing's interesting is it's less so from a traditional risk perspective, but it is creating more of a business and a financial risk to the organization. And as business functions, as teams want to do more and more with AI, you're seeing as a result a greater need in terms of technology to support that and a greater need to cost for the business. And what's happening is the technology, the IT functions of organizations is very often footing the bill for that. And
Mhm.
that's not sustainable. It is their budgets are as a result, they're spending more and they're having to explain that when in fact it's actually the business that's incurring a lot of those costs. So ensuring having proper accounting systems in place, proper chargeback models, the ability to actually be able to track and manage usage is something that organizations are starting to realize they need and needed over the past year and year and a half. But going forward, it'll be even more critical. And as much as we've been talking about the technology and cybersecurity risks, just understanding the financial and business risks is also important as to the adoption of AI capabilities in an organization.
Because so many of the tools, the AI companies, when they're all so new, are there risks that you see with organizations just hooking into, I don't want to name names, but I mean, hooking into certain platforms, and then what if those become too expensive? What if those disappear? I mean, are we creating some dependencies as an area of risk as well?
We are in a way. Part of it is understanding what are the different tools that we want to use, what's been going through our third party risk management function that's approved to the organization. But then it becomes a series of questions. And the question, for example, is how dependent am I on this one provider and this
Mhm.
technology? Can I actually architect and design in a modular way? So, if a vendor, for example, either were no longer to provide the same services, or, for example, there would be a new type of technology that emerges, can I easily swap out that portion of what I'm using? There's also the question of what should we build versus what should we buy? What does it make much more sense to build something ourselves versus, hey, maybe we don't have the development teams, or this isn't necessarily in our sweet spot of an organization what we do, and therefore should buy or license the technology. And those are ongoing conversations that we see our organizations have.
Yeah, definitely. And then also, I think about as AI just becomes more embedded into systems that organizations are already using, like their core systems for CRM or their core systems for financial reporting or HR, right? Like you're already embedded with some of these providers
Mhm.
and these tools to do your business. AI capabilities start to be provided to you as part of that.
Yeah.
Do those risks become harder to see or harder to measure? I mean, it's hard to I think it's hard to separate them sometimes or get the transparency you might want from those existing providers.
Yeah, irrespective of where the AI capability is used or where it's stood up or on what platform and technology, it still needs to adhere to the control set, the guardrails, the review, and the approval process, ensuring that, for example, if it's impacting financial systems, that explainability is there, the traceability, the auditability, and making sure that regardless of what platform or what provider you're spinning up agents in, that you're doing so compliant with your organization's policies and standards.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk a bit more about kind of like elevating up to like the board level. Do you think that boards really have a clear understanding of AI risk, or do they have some disconnect perhaps with what they think is happening or what they think the opportunity is versus what's actually happening in the organization?
They are definitely asking the questions. They're definitely asking the right questions
The right
and
questions.
the
Okay.
right questions and focusing on, hey, where are we using AI in the organization? How are we doing so in a responsible fashion? How are we tracking the benefits of that AI? How are we showing the ROI? How do we know that we're using AI in the way we intend to use it? That we're doing so with in our rules and our organization's code of conduct. What is our organization's code of conduct? Are we clear about where we're using AI and where we're not using AI? And it's being very thoughtful and asking those questions in order to unpack what the organization's doing and ensuring that AI is being used for the benefit of the business, for the benefit of customers and employees, but also doing so in a responsible fashion that's within the risk profile and the risk tolerances of that organization.
Do you see boards coming in with their own presumptions around what the benefit should be, like around cost savings or efficiencies or competitive advantage, or are they actually deferring a bit to the leadership team in the business to make that case?
Typically, they're deferring to leadership in the business to make that case, but they're also questioning, is that case there? And is that
Mhm.
case clear? And the thing with boards of directors is very often board member of one organization is also sitting on the boards of a number of other organizations, or they're an executive at another company sitting on a different company's board. And as a result, there's a lot of cross visibility and cross understanding of what companies are doing and what the management's pursuing, and therefore using that very often as a push to ask those same questions, but informed as to what they're seeing from other companies that they've got visibility into. So it's a collective community, and the need to continually, as the board of directors, to hold organizations accountable to explain and answer those questions.
Okay, great. Do you think that most organizations actually understand the risk they're taking on with AI, or do you think they're maybe making a bit of a calculated bet that They'll just experiment now and kind of deal with the risks or potential fallout later.
The world as a whole is figuring this out and figuring out the question of the notion of risk. I think one interesting example is Mythos right now, and the vulnerabilities that it's identifying and uncovering, and the speed at which. There's a question in the organization of that risk. Do we patch everything? Do we try to immediately deploy every patch to every system in our organization, running the risk of breaking something? Versus, hey, taking a bit of a slower, methodical approach and saying, hey, we're not going to necessarily patch everything all at once right away, but instead have a conversation of where should we be patching, where should we be putting in compensating controls, where should we be shutting down systems in order to, relative to the risk of any one of those vulnerabilities being exploited at a given time, in order to have that risk reward trade off.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, with Mythos, having been in offensive security 25 years,
Yeah.
I mean, I was not surprised, with what Mythos came out with. And honestly, the offensive side seems to me to be the easier side, right? It's always been kind of easier to find an issue or
Yeah.
a vulnerability. Now it's at scale, but the fixing side, the patching, the fixing, the
Mhm.
defensive side is much harder. I mean, I really sympathize with all of our organizations, our organization too, trying to work through what that means and that prioritization because to patch everything, fix everything, that's a little bit unrealistic.
Yep.
But yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And look, the answer is somewhere in the middle from that. And it's the same, it's the old adage. We have to be right 100% of the time. They only need to be right once.
Exactly.
And that's the
That's, I
fundamental
guess, what I meant.
challenge.
Right, that's what I was referring to about it being easier because we really
Yep,
only need to get one kind of foot in
exactly.
the door. Exactly. So if you took on the role as a CISO at a company today that was moving very quickly on AI,
Hmm.
what would you focus on first? What would be your first questions or first focus? And what would you just preemptively say, we can deal with this a little bit down the line?
My first questions would be very basic. Do we know where we're using AI? And what are the controls that we have? How effective are they? And how are we ensuring that they're working and that we're getting the right coverage? That would be my very first question.
Hmm.
My second question, or second thought maybe, would be that who else has the responsibility? Because it's not just me as the head of cybersecurity in this scenario, in this analogy. There's also the head of AI. There's also technology. There's also the risk function. There are also the business units. And pushing for clarity around roles and responsibilities, accountability. If, for example, the notion of AI and data protection, that would be something very much within my organization and my responsibility. But the ability to explain and provide traceability of the output of how AI came to that output, or, for example, AI generated images that are used in marketing materials and the risks that those introduce. It's not necessarily my role or purview within the cyber organization. So bringing those individuals together and ensuring that that point I was making earlier around the clear governance is in place to be able to collectively identify, mitigate, and manage the risk of AI.
For AI governance, you know, I understand all the roles and responsibilities. They're pretty well spelled out in lots of frameworks. But are you seeing there be an organizational home for it as like who is the AI governance lead? The orchestrator
Yeah.
of all of those parties? Is there like a natural fit or a trend that you're seeing?
We actually did a study of this recently. We surveyed around 100, 150 software companies and financial institutions, thinking financial institutions heavily regulated, software companies are very much at the forefront of developing and using AI. And we asked that very question. Interesting enough, about a third came back and said it was the head of cybersecurity. A third came back and said it was the chief risk officer, equivalent individual. Third came back, said it was a head of AI or AI strategy. There's
Okay.
not a clear consensus out there.
But I will say, I mean, lots of smaller organizations don't have a head of AI or don't have a head of risk. And so, I mean, I've been seeing it typically fall within the security organization to sort of orchestrate, at least in organizations that don't have any other roles that could take it on.
No, and that's fair of thinking about who's the orchestrator of it versus who are the decision makers and the accountable parties at the end of the day. And that could be the security organization, could be more of an operations function, but it's going to your point exactly, it's going to vary organization by organization. It's going to vary around the maturity. But I'd also say that this is a good time to have those conversations around risk management more broadly because AI, as much as we're talking about technology and cybersecurity, is one of many risks that an organization needs to manage. And if it's not clear around the ownership of those risks, then that in itself would be a good place to start, with AI being one of them.
Hmm. As far as the things we see in the headlines, like, news articles about downsizing the companies are doing, and they say because of AI. What's your take on how much of that is if they're actually seeing efficiencies gained already that they can reduce certain headcount, or how much of it is them pivoting, investment in headcount to be developing AI versus maybe some other functions are ready to just let go of?
Yeah, maybe two thoughts here. For the adage of AI is going to take my job, what I would view it as is the person who's using AI better than me and more effective than me. That's the person who's going to take my job. Take the nonprofit example I gave earlier, the notion of, say, applying for grants. If I'm a individual is responsible for writing and applying for funding, and I can use AI for that to help me and get a 10-20% greater return, well, that's pretty good. That's going to be put me in a more valuable and a better position within the organization. If I'm a software developer and I can use AI to more effectively write code and more with fewer, I should say, vulnerabilities in it, that's going to put me in a much stronger and better position. The way to think about it is more of individuals who are in a leadership and a management position today. This is the last generation that's only going to manage humans and people. And now your workforce, your team is going to be a mix of AI and a mix of people working together, where the individuals, the humans, are using AI to be more effective in their job.
So that generational comment brings me to another thought. I wanted to see what you've learned from your clients. I see a presumption that, let's just say, younger people in the workforce are more AI native themselves, right? Just because of where they're at in their careers and college and how much they might have been using it. But then we also see a concern or hear a concern about if you're using AI so heavily so early on, you're not building your own expertise. You're not going to be able to question some of the output of AI or question some of the processes because you never had to kind of do them manually in the first place. What do you think about that? What are you seeing?
I hope as a society we're still building the critical thinking skills, the analytics and the reasoning. If I think about whether I'm getting content from AI or whether I'm getting content for the local library or getting contact from your favorite news organization, I hope that we are still teaching in elementary, middle school, high school, college, critical thinking skills that actually allows me to have the tools to question what I'm hearing. Does it make sense? Is it logical? Do I believe it? And that should be no different if it's AI or non-AI generated content. If a colleague is going to give me a document or a couple pages that's been AI produced, that's great. I hope it drove them more efficiency and we've got a better answer. But at the end of the day, I'm still the one who's holding them accountable, not the AI accountable, but that person for the content and the output. And they better be able to explain it to me, that they've understood it, understood what it means, and that they stand by the answers produced.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm just thinking back to, like, we used to always be told, don't believe everything you read on the internet, right? But
Mm,
at least on the internet, you're looking at you're doing Google searches, looking things up. You
yeah.
kind of you're at the source. You can look at the source, and that's where I think it gets abstracted a bit with AI. Is sometimes having to even like challenge the source and not,
Yeah.
being sure the source sometimes, but
Uh,
that's just my
In
own thought.
Yeah, and use AI and understand what data it's pulling from. What are the sources it's ingesting? I mean, for example, last summer was applying for to speak at a cybersecurity conference and submitting some papers for that conference, and I was able to take a few hundred pages of material I'd already produced, put the questions together, and drop it in AI, and it actually produced a fairly good first draft. And I say that word first draft intentionally because I still needed to spend another 2 hours or so editing, going through, and making sure I was comfortable with the messaging, the words on the page, and that I could explain it and stand by what I was producing. But before, where it might have been taking me a full day, maybe in total took 4 or 5 hours to produce that, and that's the accelerator that I'm talking about and the benefits.
Right, right. One more question about frameworks. Yeah, I've been looking at a lot of the industry frameworks out there, NIST and ISO and AIUC, things like that. Do you have any thoughts or opinions on the ones you're finding the most useful or that you think clients are actually starting to rely on and want to use in their own third party supply chain and kind of risk conversations?
Yeah, it's still early in the sense that I haven't seen the consistency of the organization standard going around a standardized framework in the way with cybersecurity. They got the NIST cybersecurity framework. But with AI, the main thing would be pick one framework, leverage it, use it, adopt it in your organization, and make sure that it represents the types of AI and AI agents that you as an organization are building and developing, and that it's accounting for the risks that are being introduced and the corresponding controls.
So pick one, run with it, and then,
Yep.
maybe adapt and add on more later.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense.
And
Okay.
look, it is early. It is early. So if you feel like you need to draw inspiration from a couple, that's fine. But have one framework that you're using internally in the organization.
Okay, good. Well, thank you so much. Anything else you want to
No,
add? Any other thoughts?
my pleasure. I'm just excited by the potential. And what I would say is, in a similar way for more traditional software, same thing with AI. Ensure the guardrails are being built in at the start. Ensure the controls are there, the standardizations, the governance, the risk oversights and approvals, because this is the start of a journey that we are all on collectively, and the speed is going to be 10, 100 times what it was in the early days of the internet. And making sure that we're doing so in a responsible fashion is the brake in the car that allows us to go faster.
Absolutely. Thank you, Daniel.
Thanks for the opportunity.